There's a clock on the wall. We got an interesting program this morning. Following the meeting, the plan is we're going to get in vehicles and do a kind of a parade. Jamie will give us some details later on that. We'll go to some county park facilities. With that, we'll get the meeting under order. The agenda was posted. This is the meeting of the Land Use and Planning Committee, June 25, 2020. The agenda was posted in the office of the county clerk on the 19th day of June 2020. Notice was sent to West News, Express News, WIBD, WNBC Radio, WTKM Radio, My Community Now, Hartford Times Press, Newaska Statesman, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. With that, I'll gavel the meeting together and we'll stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let the record show, please, that we have our Land Use and Planning Committee is here. We're going to move the agenda item for the public hearing to the top of the program this morning. Following a short presentation by Paul Seabold, County Conservationist, regarding the plan, open the public hearing to receive public comments. The purpose of this hearing is to gather public opinion on the draft plan in order to meet Wisconsin statute. Be aware that you will not take any action on the plan in today's meeting or respond to questions or concerns. Rather, we are here to listen to your comments and or concerns and will make recommendations as the plan moves through the process. We are anticipating that the final plan will be brought back to this committee for approval and to recommend the adoption of the county board in September and October respectively. Please note that the land use resource management plan is created as a plan guide county land and water conservation program efforts for the next 10 years and help the county qualify for future state grants. During the public comment section of this hearing, you will hear from those both in favor and opposed to the plan. You'll be asked to give your name and then you might speak. Please keep in mind this is not a debate, it's not a question and answer session. The purpose of the hearing is simply for this committee to take your comments. Once everyone has had an opportunity to speak, the public hearing will be closed. And with that, we'll move to the presentation on the plan itself.
Logistically, this is not the way I had planned. I figured I'd be sitting in front of a computer. I guess that's right. So what Ashley's going to do is kind of bring up the plan that's or the presentation that's in your packet for the meeting, and we're kind of struggling through this rather than PowerPoint. Quick slide that goes through. So good morning and welcome. As Chairman Mary said, it's going to give a brief presentation about the information that's in the Land and Water Resource Management Plan. Since half of you are new to the Land Use and Planning Committee, and you'll also probably hear me reference Land Conservation Committee. That is kind of the statute requirement that's of the county. But because we are a merged committee, other different departments in the county, it's Land Use and Planning. So with that, we can move on. Whoops. Sorry. So the way the presentation is, if you look through your packet, it's basically kind of laid out chapter by chapter as we move through. So actually, can you go further up? Oh,
further up?
The other way. Yeah, right there. Yep. So starting out, chapter 1 basically mentions that we are required to have a land and water plan, as Chairman Mary also said. It's required in state statute 92. Like many organizations in the county, many departments, land conservation and programs and stuff that we have evolved as well. But our mission has always kind of stayed consistent. That is really to conserve long-term soil productivity, protect the quality of the related natural resources, enhance water quality, and focus on severe erosion problems. So the latest revision of Chapter 92, which requires counties to have land conservation committee and authorize you guys to hire staff, That latest revision was done 18 years ago, and that's when first land and water resource management plans were implemented. And it was really driven by counties. We are the local delivery mechanism to landowners in the county, and the residents in the county. So county said that, say, hey, we need the local conservation, we need to be locally led. Let's implement land and water resource management plans that are developed at the county level, that explains the programs, local programs, state and federal programs that we implement. And again, that's why the plan was kind of created and put into Chapter 92. As also Mary said, the requirement is that allows us to get grants. So because this is a state program, a state requirement, the state does give us grants. You'll see that as we go through the budget process that we get staffing grants, which covers like 1.5 staff persons in land conservation. And they also give us grants that we use as pass-throughs. We actually administer a state grant program that we pass dollars through the county to landowners in cost sharing. We're going to be referencing cost sharing quite a bit probably. And that's that. We pay 70% of a lot of conservation practices that go on the landscape. Landowner pays the other 30%. And like I said, that is a pass-through. So on to the next slide. So keep in mind, this is not the first land and water resource management plan of the county. So we did not do a full redraft. A lot of the programs and information has been kind of carried through from plan to plan. So if you go back and look through, they also look fairly consistent as we go through. No, I don't think so. So the plan revision process, it was actually a process. This is again required by state statute, is that we have to have an advisory committee. So we did have an advisory committee of 13 members, and that was made up of Robert Hartwig. He was appointed by the county board chair. We had 4 citizens, and that was a public notice that was put out where people could apply to be on this committee, and 4 citizens were selected. And then we had 8 partner agencies, that DNR and everything else. If you look at the first couple pages of the plan, you'll see all the partner agency representatives. And the advisory committee is really not to approve the plan, to say, here, carry this on to the land use and planning committee for approval. Because they approved it, it's really for them to help identify current local issues, anything that we might be missing as a resource concern in the county, and then they help prioritize. They give their sense of where their priorities are. We incorporate that into our annual work plans and our workload and move that forward. So the entire list is everything that is required to have in a plan. So if you've read the plan word for word, which I'm sure you all did, hopefully you've seen all of those within the plan. But the biggest thing I'll point out is really this plan revision focused on the legislative authority that's given to land conservation. So we pulled out a lot of actions and goals that have been in previous plans that really weren't our role. There were a lot of things that dealt with comprehensive plan, land use decisions, and other things. And like I said, we stripped those out and really tried to focus on what land and water conservation does. And then the last part of Chapter 1 shows where the activities and programs and stuff that land conservation does, how they align with the county strategic priorities. Chapter 2 and the layout of this is very similar to a lot of other plans. It's, if you look at the comp plan, the chapters and stuff are kind of parallel. A lot of other plans in the county, just to kind of stay consistent. So Chapter 2 talks about demographics and land use. Right now, we are the 7th fastest growing county. I think at one point we were 6th. I don't know if we were ever higher than that. But to be able to serve that growing population, it definitely needs additional housing, transportation needs, public service needs, that all affects land use decisions. So that is the current makeup of the county. We're 43% agriculture, 28% urban, 21 natural resources. As I was putting this together and thinking back when I started a little over 30 years ago, the county was 58% agriculture. So if you look at that and say, okay, well, there was a 15% reduction. That doesn't seem like much, but that 15% reduction is 1.75 townships, entire township sizes. So right now we're farming almost full 2 townships less than what we were 30 years ago. This information is not in the plan. This only came out a couple weeks ago. UW Extension put this out. They have kind of this impact statement for most counties and stuff that are out there. I thought it'd be good just to throw into this presentation and kind of that discussion of land use. I was kind of surprised, and although I never really thought much about it, that we are #1 in the state in the nursery industry. You just get down in that Jackson area, and you can definitely, Jackson, Germantown area, you can definitely see that the amount of trees and nursery stock and stuff that we're doing. So chapter 2 kind of ends the demographic and land use piece, kind of talking about utilities. We talk about that urban and land use and farming areas is we're kind of split 2/3, 60-40%. That 60% of our population is kind of in urbanized areas, meaning they have public water utilities, they have wastewater treatment facilities that deal with their waste. The other 40% is outside of that area, so they have their own septic system, they have their own private wells. But vast majority of us all drink our water that comes from the ground. We might be getting bottled water from home, but whether it's in the city water utility, that's coming out of the ground, private wells and stuff are coming out of the ground. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Chapter 3, the agricultural and natural resources. It starts to bring in information and starts to share a lot of information about the soils, the topography of the county. We can move on. And also the landscape. So hopefully you all realize that Washington County straddles the subcontinental divide. The black line that cuts kind of kitty corner across the county, everything to the east drains to the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence Seaway out to the Atlantic Ocean. Everything to the west drains south, the Mississippi River down to the Gulf of Mexico. Then diving into our surface waters, no pun intended, actually it was intended. But the county does have 200 miles of stream, 52 main lakes, 14 major lakes. One of the things that we updated in the plan is the updated 303B list, as we call. It's the impaired waters that are not meeting the water quality kind of criteria as being swimmable and fishable. That list is growing. I will say it's not because things are getting worse out there, but the DNR is using other mechanisms, water quality testing, pollution testing, chemical testing in the waters than what they had before. So as they are really diving into each stream body, each stream and or lake, they actually are adding them to the 303B list because their criteria is changing. Then crawling out of the water and onto the land, we look about our soil sustainability and erosion. Big part of our work is actually doing soil erosion rate determinations. We have detailed models that as we work with farmers across the county, we look at a field, we look how they manage, what crops they grow, put that into the model, and that determines the erosion rate. If we have an erosion rate that's above tolerable, and that tolerable soil loss is where the farm field can maintain productivity. If you start to lose more than that, there's a lot more inputs, a lot more fertilizer and everything else that needs to go onto that, onto the landscape in order to produce the yields and stuff that are out there. One of the big things that we're seeing across the county is an increased adoption of no-till. That mentions the transect survey in there. So every year we have a transect that we crisscross and we collect data points, and it's statistically reliable that we're seeing an increase in no-till and less aggressive tillage. And leaving that crop residue on the soil surface after planting, that really protects that impact of that raindrop, which is kind of the start of the erosion process. It's that soil detachment, and then it starts to transport on down and deposit. The other model we use is for construction sites. And yeah, construction sites do show a tenfold increase in erosion rate. We get a lot of arguments, discussions with developers, and it's like, well, if the farmer can plow 20 fields, I work up, I clean out an acre and disturb an acre, how can that be any worse? And how come the farmer isn't required to have silt fence and everything else? But you look at the time construction happens, it's this time of year. What have we seen the last couple of weeks? Intense rainstorms, that really hammers on those soils that are wide open. They strip that topsoil, which is kind of that natural mechanism against erosion. You have the organic matter, you have that soil structure in place. Once that's gone, you have the sands and the clays that easily erode. So that's really kind of the main reason for that tenfold increase, where you compare that now to all the crop fields that are out there. They're basically all canopied over with crops and everything else to protect that soil surface.
Excuse me, Paul.
Yeah.
Question. The no-till, what % of the farm in Washington County are no-till?
Off the top of my head, I know it's in the plan.
Just curious.
Yeah, it's, I want to say we're over 30%, 40%. And we're constantly seeing, one of the things that Transect survey does is it sees when we have years of really intense rainstorms. We had that back in 2012. You'll see a lot of tillage happening as farmers are kind of re-leveling some of the fields and stuff. So we pick that up on our Transect, and then all of a sudden, no-till will boost back up, as well as the less aggressive, the conservation tillage as we call it. Then moving into our groundwater resources and looking at infiltration and percolation. The plan does provide information on our groundwater, a little bit of information on that. Overall, our groundwater is fairly good in the county. The one thing we did add in this plan compared to previous plans is we have a surface depth of bedrock layer that was created in-house here when we worked in mine conservation. Looking at well construction logs. So we looked at every well construction log that we could map, determine where that bedrock was, and created a new depth of bedrock layer that we have. Because by and large, of all the questions and concerns we have from people that have groundwater quality issues, nitrates, bacteria, it comes in areas that have high bedrock. So it also helps us focus in areas and work areas. So, the last part of chapter 3 speaks to invasive species. In 2010, which the aquatic invasive species program was added into the plan from the previous plan. 2010, when we started our aquatic invasive species program, that kind of kicked off the need to have a strategic plan. And so that was done and approved in 13, and then there was also a revision just approved last year, a 5-year update to that plan. Having that kind of information in our land and water plan and also having that strategic plan really helps us apply for and be competitive in other grants. And by having the information mentioned in multiple plans, that's one of the things as you're filling out grants is where is this concern mentioned? We can point to various documents, bring that information in, reference it. A lot of times they ask for links. And we've been successful getting an AIS grant in 2010, 2013, 2017, and now again in 2020. And that will extend us through 2021. Moving into chapter 4 is the implementation strategy and programs and priorities. This is really what I would say is the meat and potatoes of the plan. There's a lot of information on the programs and the regulations and stuff that we administer through land conservation. Again, one of the new things that was implemented into or put into the plan is total maximum daily loads. TMDLs, is what they'll be referred to, is basically a plan where DNR and consultants run models and say, okay, all the streams and stuff in the watershed, in large watershed areas, they can receive only a certain amount of pollutants, and most of those pollutants are phosphorus and sediment. And they set limits, and those limits are then incorporated into permits, and they're incorporated into municipality permits and wastewater treatment plants. They're incorporated into basically MS4 permits, which I'll touch on a little bit more. I'll explain what that is. Is that you have to run models and show that you're meeting these limits based on TMDL. It's not just a standard 20% reduction, what used to be in the past. Right now, Washington County is covered 99.99% of the area. We have the Rock River TMDL, which was adopted in 2011, and the Milwaukee River TMDL, which was adopted in 2018. And it's really going to affect all landscapes, whether it's the agricultural landscape, the non-permitted urban landscape, and the permitted urban landscape is that MS4 wastewater treatment plants, barnyards, farmsteads, you name it. And I will say in many places in the county, the limits that are in these plans will be difficult, if not impossible to reach. So that's where the plan also talks about other options, the other options of adaptive management, water quality treating that might have to be considered as trying to meet those limits. State performance standards and priorities. Again, we administer a lot of state programs. We're that local delivery system. There is the agricultural performance standards and non-agricultural performance standards. Both of those are in NR 151 of the Administrative Board of DNR. Those probably constitute the major of our workload, is implementing those state performance standards. And the developed urban standard, the MS4 I talked about, is Municipal separate storm sewer system, the 4 S's, and that's where we get the MS4 from. So you can move on. The agricultural performance standards does deal both with cropland and livestock, or that farmstead. On that cropland, we look at the soil erosion, like I talked about, work with their agronomists, or have the farmers be trained how to be their own agronomist on spreading fertilizer. And then also we have models that determine how much pollution, how much sediment, and how much phosphorus can also come off the field. There's a requirements within that. TMDLs ratchet down those requirements compared to what's in the agricultural performance standards and NR 151. The part with agriculture performance standards, because it deals with more non-point, there's not a regulation mechanism on there. So in order for us to require any of the agriculture performance standards, we have to offer 70% cost sharing. That's in administrative code. And that is challenging at times to make sure we have enough funding to be able to make those offers. That administrative or the agriculture performance standards have been changed, as well as the non-ag standards over the years. They're constantly modifying, adding them, everything else. And the recent addition with the Solarium Bedrock, they call it the targeted performance standard because it only targets like 13 counties in the state, areas that have shallow bedrock, and that deals with spreading of animal waste on fields that have less than 20 feet of bedrock. So there's certain things the farmer should be doing when they're spreading that waste. If it's less than 2 feet of bedrock, no animal waste should be spread on those fields whatsoever. So that was the latest addition that was just put in a couple of years back. And it also really helps for us to have that bedrock layer so that we can really hone in a lot of closer areas than what was out there from the USGS layer. The plan does recognize that we do have an MOU currently with the DNR, but that's in our work plan for the next couple of years. Been in place since 2006. It kind of sets the priorities and responsibilities of implementation of the state performance standards. I will say the DNR and Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection, they're pushing a lot of counties that the counties adopt those requirements in a county ordinance. That can be both good and bad. The good part is we are in control. The bad part is that we are in control. So it's a regulation that if you all of a sudden are forcing somebody to do something, it's going to require a lot more county attorney time of legal stuff as opposed to saying, here we got a bad site, DNR, you enforce it, and we'll be there to help implement and fix the state. The non-agricultural performance standards, those are already adopted under erosion control stormwater management ordinance. We had that since 1997. We've been updating that as the performance standards and stuff change. That ordinance kind of covers 3 things. It controls erosion during construction sites, silt fence and things that you have straw bales around, getting things seeded and matted as soon as possible. Post-construction, controlling the peak runoff after development. So you can imagine you have all this extra impervious area. Person downstream during a rain event is going to see more water as a flash. So those stormwater ponds and infiltration basins kind of suck that up and kind of use that as a sponge slowly release that water. And then the ordinance also calls for long-term maintenance of those stormwater facilities. Expect to hear more about that, whether it's at your local municipality or back at these meetings. That long-term maintenance, we are getting to the critical stage where some of these stormwater basins have been in 20 years and are really going to start to need some maintenance and some work on them. So funding those, who's responsible for those, it's going to bring up a lot of questions and a lot of discussion. The developed urban standards, the MS4, the county does have a permit. We're not alone. The city of West Bend, city of Hartford, 5 villages, all of them but Newburgh, and 2 townships, Hartford and West Bend, both have the same permit. It's based on population density. If you have a population density of 1,000 per square mile, that's considered urbanized area, and you have to implement all these programs within that area or to those residents. And obviously, if you're doing it for specific residents, you're doing it for everybody, but you definitely need education outreach, be able to allow public involvement. Seeing storm drain stenciling, you stencil next to a storm drain, but no waste that drains the stream. That's kind of a public involvement piece. Illicit discharge is more for those sanitary sewers. It's where they might have illegal hookups from a house, the drain out of the garage or something like that. They illegally hooked up. You can actually see that if there's oil and stuff coming out where it enters the stream. That's kind of the illicit discharge piece. Construction and post-construction site, we already had that on our erosion control. And then pollution prevention is again another model where we're making sure we're hitting those TMDL limits. And we just got our permit updated, and those TMDL limits were put in our permit that we just got. So this whole summer, we're going to be going through another modeling phase to making sure that if we don't hit those limits, we have to designate practices that we're going to implement over the next 5-10 years and be able to get those limits down to meeting the TMDL requirements. The best part about the Land and Water Resource Management Plan, I mentioned it's for locally led conservation. So there are some local programs that are identified in the plan. Two of them that are highlighted here on the screen are Regional Conservation Partnership Program. That is really being led by Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District. They approached us in Ozaki County saying, hey, would you be interested to apply for a grant, specialized funding through USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, to do conservation practices and also to buy development rights on properties. And that was in the Cedar Creeks, basically the town of Jackson and kind of straight over across Ozaki County to Lake Michigan in that designated area. 4 years ago, they got a $1.5 million grant through the USDA to focus on that area. They've also supplied Washington County with $10,000 a year for us to target staff in that area to work with them. We just heard 2 months ago that they applied for the rest of the Milwaukee River, east, west, and north branch. And they got a $7.5 million award, the only one in the state of Wisconsin. And that's going to be going on for the next 5 years. That extends, like I said, up into Sheboygan and into Fond du Lac County as well as the rest of Ozaki.
I just want to point out that's important if you remember that divide in the watersheds through the county. Lots of money on the side with the Great Lakes, not so much money on the other side. And so that's something that I know Paul and his team struggle with related to equitably distributing programming to farmers or conservation cost share dollars because there's a line.
Right. And that's been almost through my entire career. We had the Milwaukee River Priority Watershed Program back when I started 30 years ago. There was a lot of money on the east side of the county, not much activity and not much dollars were available to farmers on the western side of the county. So there are other programs that win other grants that we can apply for to make up that difference. But the other local program I'll highlight is the Cedar Creek Farmers. And it's a producer-led group. It's a group of basically, I think we're up to 8 farmers in the Cedar Creek area, which is the town of Jackson and kind of the surrounding in the Polk and a little bit into Trenton and down into Germantown. Those guys are really advocating their soil health practices, and soil health is a lot of no-till, cover crops, keeping that soil covered during the wintertime. Improving all that structure of the soil helps improve infiltration and less runoff. So both of these practices also tie back to performance standards, to water quality, maintaining, soil productivity and everything else, the mission of land conservation, state requirements that we're doing. Everything that we do is kind of somewhat tied all back to, again, back to our mission. So we're seeing a lot of recognition by local organizations, the Cedar Lakes Conservation Foundation. They're really starting to partner with the Cedar Creek farmers. They see the advantages of working with them. So yeah, like I said, the Land and Water Plan is really to kind of also help those and really kind of help recognize those local efforts and stuff that we're doing. Chapter 5, Information and Education Strategy. All of Chapter 5 is dedicated to that. I always say is where would we be if we didn't have education, if nobody taught us to do something? Assuming everybody, when they're brushing their teeth, they turn their water on. That was an education push, some 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it's in everything we do. Everything we do is an educational tool. Whether it's one-on-one contacting, talking about soil health, whatever, it's all education. It's definitely a primary function of land conservation. And the benefits are definitely on the screen. And it obviously is most effective when the information is provided consistently and continually. If you were told as a kid, turn the water off when you brush your teeth just once, you think you'd be doing that if your parents let the water run? Probably not. It's that continual education piece that is a big part of all of our programs. Chapter 6 is, I would say, probably had the most change from previous plans. Previous plans had a lot of the goals and objectives listed, and I mentioned earlier, we kind of stripped out a lot of those that didn't apply to land conservation, where we didn't have our legislative authority. So we really kind of narrowed the focus. Department of Ag changed the planning effort from a 10-year plan or from a 5-year plan to now 10-year plans. Where previously we spent a lot of time trying to put information of details of measurable outcomes, measurable actions and stuff that we're going to do, and that's hard to do in a 10-year planning document. We've got a hard time saying what we're going to do next year. We could have another pandemic, we could have a stretch of this pandemic, the economy blows up, things just change too fast, and trying to put numbers and details in a planning document is really tough. So even Department of Ag said, yeah, you can strip that out. Just basically kind of create, it's a bullet list that we can choose from. And when we put our annual report together or apply for grants annually to say, all right, what is our annual workload next year? We can kind of see on the horizon what's coming up. We can pull out those bullets, add that to an annual work plan, and submit that with our grant applications rather than try to put it in the 10-year plan. Chapter 7. Likewise, it's a requirement to have in there is basically a long-range budget. Again, putting a long-range budget in a planning document in a county government system is kind of like a crapshoot. We don't know what changes and stuff are going to be happening over time, but there is an estimate of staff costs and things. What the plan does is it does mention some shortcomings we're going to have in staffing. We have not only our product invasive species coordinator that's fully grant funded. That grant system is going to be changing once we hit 2022. We have another technician that's fully grant funded. His grant ends early next year. So we're really kind of what the plan does is it allows and it brings up kind of discussion points for future discussions on budgets and where we're going to be going for staffing and stuff as we move through the future. The second part of that chapter deals with cost share needs. How much cost sharing do we need to get conservation on the ground? Those numbers that are in that chart are really kind of based on realistic what the state budgets are and what they offer counties. We could say, hey, we want $3 million every year, but the chance of getting that is virtually impossible. So those are kind of realistic numbers. Hopefully you all had a chance to go through the plan and you got to Appendix C, which highlighted the practices that were installed in the last 10 years. You go to the previous plan, you'll see decades before that, numbers of practices and cost share dollars provided. One of the things I'd like to point out is that if you look at the line item of what the county taxpayers are paying in land conservation, what they're supplying dollar for dollar, you compare that with the grants and stuff that we're pulling in, it's a dollar for dollar match, meaning what the county is giving land conservation for staff, we're bringing in equal, if not a lot more, in grant dollars for water quality improvements. I'll throw that up there. Chapter 9, the last chapter, basically talks about our evaluation. All good plan needs a system for evaluating the work and stuff we do. So we do track a lot of the activities that we do, number of landowner contacts, the number of plans we write, number of permits we issue, number of dollars spent, you name it, we track all that. You can move to the next slide. As well as I mentioned earlier, we do models for erosion rates, but we have other models for pollution reduction and everything else. We run before and after models. We report that to the state. We report that in other documents and stuff that we have, annual reports to the county for the reductions, and that's all models. And hopefully models do end up equating to what we actually visually see in the stream, and that we're making water quality improvements. I have no doubt we are. You look at the Milwaukee River, when I started, Milwaukee River was carp habitat. Everybody just went down there to spear carp. And now the Milwaukee River is one of the best smallmouth bass fisheries in the state. So if you like smallmouth bass fishing, get on the Milwaukee River, it's there. So that has been done. Big ones, right? I mean, that's from a lot of work, not just county land conservation, but a lot of other organizations. Big help was taking out some of the dams and stuff on the Milwaukee River, but we're definitely making an increase and improvement, I should say. But it's like I said, it's hopefully DNR is modeling. We're still not there yet where the DNR wants us to be statewide. So that is all I have, Mr. Chairman. turn it back to you for the public hearing and entertain any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Just a couple of comments before we go to questions. First of all, it's a wonderful presentation. I don't know how many of you actually took the time to read all of it. Tremendous amount of data. And I commend you and everybody else who was involved with that to pull together the information in a format that's easily understood. And I commend you for whoever was involved with it. I want to thank you for that. It was a great job. My question is, what's next?
So the next process, obviously, we'll take any public comments that we have, but we'll take those public comments if you know they're definitely viable public comments. We'll incorporate that in the plan, make changes where we need to. The next stage is by next week, I'll submit the plan to the Department of Ag. They have their staff critically go through the plan. They schedule the Land and Water Resource Management Board, which is the board for Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection. August 4th, we're scheduled to be in front of that, and you've seen in the report for the meeting is I need all the land conservation or at least one person representing the Land Use and Planning Committee to be with me at that presentation. I'm not sure if it's something that we actually do a Zoom call or if we go down to Madison for the couple-hour presentation. Actually, it's a 5 to 10-minute presentation, but we have to present the plan to them. They don't have any changes. They basically give us the document that says, hey, your land and water plan is approved for the next 10 years. It's signed by the Secretary of Department of Ag. And then it comes back to this committee as a resolution to pass it on to the county board for adoption. And then it goes to the county board. So hoping that the resolution comes back here in September and onto the county board in October. And then it's approved. I can
So I just do want to say, other surrounding counties hired SURPAC to do this work. And Paul and his team did this in-house, and I think he told me he got hired SURPAC next time. I don't know that I agree, but they really did a good job.
It's an excellent job. And again, anything you need from this committee is in terms of going to Madison, other presentations, let us know through the channels and we'll do it. And the one thing I found interesting is you talked about the Milwaukee River being a dividing line. I had no idea that existed. I assume that we have situations where a farmer on one side of the river is eligible for different funding than someone on the other side of the river.
Yep. Yes.
And what I assume also you've got some formulas such that the farmland straddles the river. You've got portions of the east side or portions of the west side.
Yeah, it's usually if more than 50% is on one side and he's eligible, we can cost share the operation. If there's and a lot of that, once you get into cropland practices and cost sharing, the dollars are really kind of minimal. It comes into that farmstead. You know, if you're doing barnyard runoff systems, putting roof over barnyards, making sure that there's no feed DJ coming off, putting in a big collection pond, and I think that was in our report. But it was last month's report. There was an overview of Random Farm just north of here, putting in a big huge DJ collection. I mean, it's a $100,000 project, $100,000 in cost sharing, almost a $200,000 project. That is really kind of pinpointed. That'll determine if they're on one side of the line or not. So money is easier to get on the Milwaukee River. It's a little tougher. It's other grant possibilities and stuff that we have to go for in the rock, and it just takes longer. It's an application process, and we find out possibly 2 years later. But really, the economy drives everything. I mean, the farmers don't have their 30% to spend, because of whether it's COVID or whether it's bad, farm commodity prices the last 3 or 4 years. It reduces the amount of conservation, and that's where it's really kind of nice to work with the Cedar Creek farmers, promoting those low-cost practices, promoting those management practices that really can kind of make up that difference. It's less inputs you have, the more your profits will be, even at the commodity price.
I know you said there's more money on one side than the other. Recently, the Oconomowoc watershed purchased some farmland near us around there. Where does that money all come from? They purchased the rights, so the land never gets developed, and if it ever changes hands, it goes back to the Oconomowoc watershed.
Right.
Where does that funding come from?
That money was also part of the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. They applied, and it was they, meaning the Hall Pines Conservancy, working with the city of Conemaugh. City of Conemaugh is doing an adaptive management plan, so their wastewater treatment plan said, all right, we look at our plant, we have to meet a certain phosphorus limit coming out of our pipe. Well, it's gonna cost us $20 million to fix up our plant, but if we probably spend maybe $8 million up in the landscape, we can kind of trade those credits, you know, to say, all right, we can do enough improvements in the landscape to improve the water quality that we don't have to do as much as in construction at our plant. So the city of Conemaugh says, hey, we're gonna be investing in that program. So they paid about 25% of those development rights. The federal government paid 50% of those development rights. And then I think Pulp Mines Conservancy, kind of a land trust, I think they covered the other 25%. But it was through that RCPP program, Regional Conservation Partnership, where the state says, all right, we'll designate these funds for these practices in this area, rather than competing on a nationwide scale.
My apologies for not introducing Mr. Struck before. He's rejoining us this year as a civilian member of the Land Use and Planning Committee. Any other comments from the board, and we'll open up for any public comments.
So Chairman, if you don't mind, I'm not sure if everybody knows, some of you are new to the Land Use and Planning Committee. By state statute, the development of the makeup of the Land Conservation Committee, which again is the Land Use and Planning Committee, requires a member from the Farm Services Agency. Larry is on that committee. And it also requires 2 people that serve on the UW Extension Committee, which this committee oversees. So you kind of got that covered in years past. A lot more boards and a lot more different different committees. It was making sure that you had all the right people on the committees. I'm sure that was a chess team at times. Right.
Any comments or questions from the committee? Any public comments or questions? Hearing none, then we'll declare the public forum and the public hearing part is closed.
I will also add that we did not receive any written comments. So it was in the paper that you could supply written comments as well. We did not get any as of yesterday.
At this point in time, let's move on to the action on this. I would entertain a motion to approve this draft as presented.
We don't necessarily need a motion to approve. This was the public hearing to take comment. You know, so if there's no comments and nothing really changes in the plan, we're going to basically move the plan on the Department of Ag for their review of the conservation work.
All right, we stand corrected, and we'll just move forward with the agenda then.
And if you're reading I just want to add, if you're reading through the plan and you have any language concerns or, and something jumps out at you as, hey, that just doesn't fit quite right in terms of how I might think about that, or you have any questions, please feel free to contact Paul directly about those. We'd like to try to get those, because sometimes it's simply a word that we might not like, especially on a topic like this where it's very regulatory in nature, even though. Please reach out on those. I think I caught them all, but if there are more, let's try to catch those before we get into a forum where we're, wordsmithing the areas. So that's my request. If you get a chance to read through it, I think we got them all. But thank you.
Mr. Chair, did have a question. So Paul, you mentioned about grants and some changes in 2021. So I'm assuming administration is aware of what the impacts could be, whether they're diminished or stopped altogether, or we have to look at new grant filings. I'm assuming that's on. Yeah. Thank you.
Being discussed in the current budget for next year, the plan for next year's budget. So,
Well, with that, we'll continue with the agenda on the items on the consent agenda. Any comments or questions on any of these items?
To approve consent agenda items for A through E as presented.
Is there a second? Mr. Krebs, second. I would suggest we have a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll move on to the discussion items, department budget updates. Is there a presentation on that?
Quick one. So everybody received this presentation in your packet. There's also a one-page memo for the departments committee. I'm just going to briefly cover this presentation, just provide a little bit of update since it first came out, and then if there's anything that you want to cover in depth or questions on, so not much in this document has changed. Unfortunately, very good news. There was one small area where we did experience something better than we anticipated. Our sales tax projections for April came in. They were still down, we were not down as far as we had anticipated. That trend continues through the end of this year. We're estimating that our sales tax, instead of being $2 million short, will be closer to about $1.5 million. So, not much when you look at the grand scheme of a $1 million goal right now, but so we're going to keep an eye on that. We're also keeping an eye on where interest rates are, but not leaving. The other fiscal impacts on the departments, those haven't been changed either yet. So kind of figuring out that so our approach that we outlined for 20 is still what we're planning for this year, and the plan for 21 that's outlined in here is also how we're approaching the budget process. So as we continue through that budget process and we get additional data, sales tax numbers continue to come in, employment rates continue to come back, we'll keep taking a look at that and tweaking as we go. So if there's anything specifically you want me to cover or speak on, do that.
Questions or comments? Thank you. Next item on the discussion was the open discussion overview of the land and water resource management plan. I believe we covered it, Jamie. One of the action items, since no action was required for the public hearing, we wanted the rejecting authority Kinderberg Estates. This is the first item on here. And the question is, should the committee indicate no objections to the preliminary plat for Kinderberg Estates? One will do the discussion, please.
Yep.
Okay, we have the Kinderberg Estates subdivision, preliminary plat, Village of Germantown up for review today. Washington County is an objecting authority for all subdivision reviews within cities and villages, which is different than what Washington County is for subdivisions proposed in townships. In that case, Washington County is approving authority. So, as an objecting authority, this committee can not formally approve or disapprove, but they can raise objections to certain items that we can relay to the State Department of Administration plat. And those can be then taken up by the state, and they will then address those to the developer. So with that, I'll go over, let's just show the airport. Should be the next one. Again, Kinderberg Estates, preliminary plat in the Village of Germantown. This is just north of Donjas Bay Road and a little bit east of Pilgrim Road. And as you can see, as the map comes into focus here, Donjas Bay Road is to the south. Preserve Parkway borders the west, and I think you can see the lines for the subdivision. So here's the subdivision itself. So Donjas Bay Road south, Preserve Parkway to the west, Kinderberg Park to the north, and other existing subdivisions here to the east. This will be a 16-lot subdivision, and it'll have 3 outlots. You can see it's a cul-de-sac type development, and Each of the lots are gonna range in size from about 20,000 square feet to 37,000 square feet. And this will all be served by the village's municipal sewer, water, and stormwater. There is a county bikeway and trail plan that runs to the south of this along Donjas Bay Road. The village has been made aware of that, and they are taking that into consideration as part of the approval of the project. So with that, we cannot see as a department any reason for objecting to anything that's been presented with this development. So
That bikeway, that's the asphalt, that's between the property and the road.
Deb, you want to comment on the bikeway trail? What's that?
Bikeway and trail plan, we have 7 priority corridors. Number 6 is actually through Germantown, exactly where Bill had pointed out to the south of subdivision. Priority corridor number 6 really connects the population of Germantown down to the bump line via the overpass right by Costco, the pedestrian overpass. I did touch base with the administrator for Germantown, Steve Kirkhope, just to make sure that he was aware. I sent him a picture exactly where that bike lane is. It is about a 6-foot wide sidewalk right now. In the proposal, it should be a 10-foot wide shared bike lane. He is very interested in working with Washington County in the eventual development on the connection from Germantown to Menominee Falls and the belt line. So he was very happy that I contacted him and informed him that this is a proposal in our plan. They have mechanisms in their ordinance to request that the developer, either through impact fees or through improvement, construction improvements, to possibly make that happen. So that's something that they were going to look at, and he was going to talk to their planner, Jeff Reslaw, as part of their review process on the subdivision.
Thanks, Deb. And so I just want to take a good opportunity. Deb made that phone call and she did a great job in making the village of Germantown aware. But as it relates to this, it's really not our role. I mean, we don't, you know, it is the role of the local cities and villages to work with developers and their requirements. We know it's a good opportunity, and so we wanted to make sure that it wasn't missed. They probably would not have missed it. They added the plan to their comprehensive plan. So we wanted to, you know, I wouldn't necessarily recommend we pulling it out any further than we already have. But it is something we wanted to point out to this committee that we look for that type of a thing just as on a regional level when these come through.
Yeah, and part of the discussion with the bikeway and trail plan that got adopted by the county board is that this is not just a plan for the county. The county to implement that plan, the county definitely needs to partner with all of our local governments, the nonprofit agencies, and the state DNR to implement that plan. And this is just one part of that.
On a personal note, my residence is almost exactly half a mile south. We go past this all the time. This has been a long time in coming. The Germantown School District has owned this property. And I don't know how many times they've come back with plans to the village. I think it was 26 lots originally, and then it was too many. The residents got involved. I think this is about the 4th or 5th time that this has finally been come to resolution on this. So. Any other comments or questions? If not, then I would recommend that the committee, I guess I'll entertain a motion. That the committee indicate no objection to the preliminary plot of Kinderberg Estate subdivision. A motion that. Perhaps a second. Moving on to item number 6C, the grant application of EPA. All in favor, say aye. Now moving on to grant application to EPA. Ms. Ludovic, are you gonna?
I'm actually going to defer this over to our deputy administrator, Deb Zilke. She handles, or she leads the county's brownfields program, so she can give us a very quick overview on what this is.
Thank you. Yeah, this resolution is to apply for fiscal year 2021 assessment grant to the US EPA. This would be, if we receive it, this would be our third assessment grant through the EPA. We received a 2014 grant and a 2017 grant. And we are almost done with the 2017 grant. It ends at the end of September. And we have over 95% of those grant funds already allocated. So we're just wrapping that grant up. So if we were to receive this one, we would be able to start that. It would be probably a year delayed. It's typically grant funds. Applications are due usually in December, and then we're able to start using the funds the following October, so they'll be a little bit delayed on that. We did apply for a fiscal year 2020 grant, assessment grant, and a loan fund. We did receive a loan fund, we did not receive the assessment grant. Last week I had a debriefing with the EPA, just as an informational of what could we do better, what did we miss. One of the highlights that we talked about was connecting the brownfields contamination and the impact of remediating those contaminants on health. So we need to do a better job of connecting, let's say, areas that have lead-based paint, connecting that to cancer rates or birth defects, or buildings that have asbestos, and how these grants will be able to help assess those buildings, remediate those areas, and that would have a positive impact lowering cancer rates from asbestos. So we need to do a better job of making those connections based on the health impacts of remediating these sites. So I'm confident that the next grant application will be successful for the assessment.
Any other questions regarding this?
This would be the future grant application. Deb, I noticed the language spoke about no staffing at this time. Would there be any anticipated staffing that we received the grant?
I am putting in there less than 5% of the grant would be helping to reimburse the county some of the staffing time. There is no match to this grant, but we do provide an in-kind contribution that's usually anywhere between $50,000 and $80,000 or $90,000. But that includes not just the county time, but all of our several local government coalition partners contribute in kind, as well as the EWC. One other thing I wanted to point out is that this has been an extremely successful program. It started back in 2014, and we've been working with Stantec Consulting Services and Manual Association, and we've had an amazing partnership with the EWC. And they have all decided to help and assist the county in this grant application free of charge and at no risk to the county whatsoever. So I think that is very much to be commended. And it surely is a reflection of our great relationship that we have with these consultants.
Comments or questions? With that, is there a motion to approve the resolution? Motion has been made and seconded to approve the resolution. All in favor, say aye. Motion passed. That concludes the official business here. Now, we're going to be leaving shortly for our motorcade to specific Washington County parks. Ms. Ludovic, can you give us the directions or instructions on that, please?
Sure. Because we still have some COVID-19 protocols in place at the county level, we won't be riding together. However, if the board wants to ride together, they can. So from here, we'll probably take about a 5-minute break. And then we will head to our vehicles, and our first stop is gonna be Sandy Knoll County Park. So you're welcome to follow myself or Eric, or, you know specifically where we're parking and the other first lot. First lot on the left, is where we'll kind of be meeting and looking to assemble there to start. From Sandy Knoll, we're gonna go down to Homes and Hollow, correct?
Yep, going on the homes that come, raise your bills, stop at Michigan side link access, similarly. Just west of West.
And if you, I will note that, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna check out the new dog park and the, kind of the camping area that's in the works for next year. So Sandy Knoll is just a half away, so if you can join us for one park, that's great. You're welcome to come and leave at any point, from any point on the tour, so it will not be affected.
Should we all gather in the parking lot at a particular time and place so we know whose vehicle is whose?
Sure, we can look to leave here at 40. That work for everybody? Okay. Awesome.
There being no other first business to attend to, I adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Was he not supposed
Take it
to
in.
adjourn?